The idea that we can reach salvation through science is ancient and powerful. With this sentence, Mary Midgley opens her classic work, Science as Salvation. Her book, she says, is therefore not just about our attitudes to science, but about those imaginative needs. It is about myth-making, not just as a private vice, but as a vital human function. It is rather obvious that science and the technologies that it promises have replaced religion as the ground of our hope for a better future. But today I want to undertake the theological exploration of the ground of salvation that lies beyond science and technology and also beyond religion. Those imaginative needs to which Mary Midgley alludes indicate that the location of technology is not first or foremost the lab or the factory or even the cloud, but the human imagination. Let me be clear about this claim I'm making here. For me, intervention in an external physical world is indispensable in the definition of technology. I'm not adopting Foucault's idea of technologies of the self, nor do I endorse the postmodern view that reduces the materiality of technology to the effects of language and regimes of power. The materiality of technology is essential to its place in the human imagination. Why? Because technology directs the human imagination outwards to the external physical world as a site for transformation of simultaneously both the world and the self. In short, technology enables for us human beings acts of transcendence. To talk about transcendence is to speak theologically. That transcendence is connected to religion may also seem obvious, since religion may be defined as reaching out to the divine or the ultimate through acts of transcendence. Furthermore, the promise held out by many religious traditions that it is possible to transcend the human finds a contemporary secular competitor in transhumanism. Yet to speak theologically about transcendence is to address that ground of salvation that lies beyond science and technology and also beyond religion. The subject matter of theology is not religion, but reality, and transcendence is foundational to human reality. The anthropologist Maurice Bloch, in his essay, Why Religion is Central, but Why Religion is Nothing Special but is Central, proposes that religion is a primary expression of what he calls the transcendental social. He argues that this is the capacity to imagine other worlds that lies at the very foundation of the sociality of modern human society. In fact, social reality cannot exist without this social imaginary, because we cannot experience ourselves beyond the immediate interactions of our kin network unless, through our imagination, we are able to extend the notion of kin to conceive of ourselves as members of some intangible and invisible groups, such as nations, and in the ultimate abstraction, human society. Transcendence is a neurological feature of our species. This is not to reduce experience of the divine to a supposedly mere brain function. If God exists, then God, through the processes of evolution, called into existence our species with the neurological capacity for transcendence. What this means for theology is that the experience of the divine or an ultimate beyond the human realm is part of a broader experience of the transcendental social. Not only religion inhabits the transcendental social, but also technology, which allows us in Bloch's phrase to imagine other worlds. Bloch's discussion of the transcendental social focuses on essentialized groups and roles, and he identifies as a primary example of these gender roles. Individual women and men have to contend with the fact that they live in societies where, as Bloch says, the transcendental network involves gender roles, therefore creating transcendental women and men. Gender and sexuality have a materiality that parallels that of technology. They are part of the social imagination that includes but also goes beyond the effects of language and regimes of power. When we imagine ourselves as gendered and sexual beings, we are doing so from the position of being embodied in the physical world. This embodiment both occurs on the level of our individual bodies and goes beyond their boundaries. Next slide. Oops, I'm almost leaving the meeting. The rest of my presentation is concerned how the specific materialities of technology and gender sexuality intersect in the social imagination and therefore in the realm of transcendence. Ian Barber, in his book Ethics in an Age of Technology, proposes a theoretical description of technology as the application of organized knowledge to practical tasks by ordered systems of people and machines. I would quibble with the notion that technology can be equated with machines, but the main point here is that technology always entails a social organization. Gender and sexuality are also a matter of social organization, but one that occupies a very different, indeed opposite place than technology in the social imagination. The distinction between nature and artifact is a fundamental category that characterizes how at least Western societies have been constructed. Gender and sexuality have been assigned to the realm of nature and technology to the domain of the artifact. This distinction needs to be troubled on several levels. Nature as a human category is how the physical world has been conceptualized, but it is not intrinsic to the physical world itself. In this case, the materiality of the category nature is exhausted in the effects of language and regimes of power. It inspires our interventions in physical and social worlds that have very real and often devastating effects. It allows us to organize our knowledge about the physical world, but also to exploit the physical world so constructed in ways that we have created an environmental crisis that we are grappling with, even to understand scientifically. It also allowed us in the modern West to devise the idea of complementary male and female natures, aided and abetted by the development of the so-called natural sciences of the 17th through 20th centuries. Feminists have often noted how modern science and technology have equated nature with woman as that which is to be controlled by men. However, in her critique of Carolyn Merchant, Donna Haraway pointed out that simply repudiating the subordinate status of women and nature is not enough. What needs to be abandoned is the entire dichotomy of woman and the physical world as natural versus the technical artifact as the product of male culture. In its place, Haraway famously places the figure of the cyborg that signals, as she says, the boundary between physical and non-physical is very imprecise for us. The feminist theologian Elaine Graham, I'll come back to that. The feminist theologian and ethicist Elaine Graham addresses the central thesis of Haraway, that the boundaries between organism and machine and between human and non-human animals have been breached. Graham describes this blurring of boundaries as a dissolution of the ontological hygiene by which for the past 300 years Western culture has borne the fault lines that separate humans, nature, and machines. One of the boundaries that Haraway and Graham see transgressed in contemporary society and culture is the one between human bodies and their physical environment. Haraway's later work extends her view that agency exists not only in human beings, and that we need to recognize all and other species inhabiting Earth as oddkin, with whom we must collaborate to survive. This radically extends the essentialized groups of fictive kin that could constitute a transcendental social. The feminist particle physicist and theorist Karen Barrett advocates an agential realism that acknowledges the agency of all matter. For these feminist thinkers, our bodies are the permeable boundaries through which many agents, human and non-human, pass. As the distinction between nature and artifice falls apart, in not only feminists, but also in much of the intellectual discourse since the late 20th century, where does this leave technology? Its modern conceptual foundations may be crumbling, but this is happening at a time of unprecedented and accelerating technological innovation. Technology is not only rapidly changing our everyday lives, it is also transforming the social imagination. It is therefore not surprising that the critique of technology intensifies, at least in academic circles. Graham believes that we are now confronted with a technological sublime that incorporates all the worst features of earlier religious Christian transcendence, otherworldliness and the desire to rid the human self of embodiment. Her particular target are the transhumanists, who admittedly garner the most media attention and have some powerful backers in Silicon Valley. Graham, like other feminist critics, contends that the transhumanist vision ignores the demands for equity and justice. Instead, it is argued the transhumanist vision is of technological enhancements that would mainly benefit well-off white men in their quest to escape the messiness and mortality of the human body, but would do this at the expense of technology being used to address the unmet basic needs of the majority of the human population. Much of this criticism of transhumanism is justified, but there is one aspect of Graham's critique which, in my opinion, astoundingly echoes conservative religious opposition to science and technology. The claim that it illegitimately erases the boundary between human and divine. If one wants to dismantle ontological hygiene, the ultimate and necessary boundary to be transgressed is the one between the human and the divine. Admittedly, Graham wants to recuperate an understanding of transcendence that locates the divine human encounter in the immanent embodied material world. Yet this seems to be a liberal Christian rejection of the supernatural rather than the repudiation of the natural supernatural binary itself. I've already published a response to Graham in my essay, What is Feminist Theology?, which I will not reiterate here. Instead, I want to expand its suspension of ontological hygiene, even and especially in the case of the divine, by invoking the transcendental social. If, as I have argued, divinity can be conceived of as having permeable boundaries with the human and non-human, with the organic and inorganic, even with the cyborg and the technological artifact, then how does this reconfigure transcendence, and how could this reconfigured transcendence integrate not only technology, but also gender and sexuality within the social imagination? Further, what new relationships could be established between technology and gender sexuality in material reality when transcendence is thus reconceived? Let me end with a brief excursus on the relationship of sexual politics, technology, and transcendence in the ancient world and its implications for our present. I might title this From Concrete to Graphene. I'm going to state as a premise, which I do not have time to defend, that there is no essential difference between ancient and modern technology. At the turn of the first millennium, the ancient Mediterranean had been definitively unified by Roman conquest, and a new form of government, the rule of an emperor, had replaced the earlier Roman Republic. Roman conquest had led to a vast increase in the number of persons enslaved, and Roman imperial government sought cultural legitimation. The Roman state employed technology to reshape the transcendental social in ways which it hoped to counteract the potential for social unrest that its imperialist policies and autocratic rule had unleashed. It built the amphitheater. This would have been impossible without several technological innovations that converged at this point. Most important among them was the invention of concrete. It is noteworthy that concrete was not invented to build the amphitheater, but this became one of its major uses. Large amphitheaters could accommodate tens of thousands of spectators, and they sprang up across the empire, especially in its western half. It was the biggest form of mass entertainment before Hollywood and the cinema in the 20th century. The seating of spectators was carefully arranged to reflect social hierarchy and to signal to the lowliest of them that they were for now not on the floor of the arena. On the arena floor were those who were criminalized, taken captive, those who were outside the realm of the socially acceptable, or whose lives as slaves were utterly dispensable. Elaborate machines allowed spectacles that thrilled the crowds and inspired awe for the emperor whose power could provide them. These spectacles aimed at the humiliation, torture, and death of those on the arena floor, and many of them were characterized by an intense sexual sadism. Even for those on the arena floor who were not being executed, it was a dangerous place in which humiliation, injury, and death were common. The amphitheater was also a site where traditional patriarchal values were reinforced through the demarcation between honorable free women and dishonored slave women. Among its shows were the public sexual exploitation of slave women. Enter the Christian martyrs, who exposed themselves to the violence of the amphitheater, including the sexual violence, in a direct contestation of Roman imperial power. Martyrdom defined ancient Christian identity and subverted the transcendental social that the amphitheater had been created to maintain. A Christian social imagination emerged that rethought the relationship of technology to spectacle and of sexuality to social identity. Technology was to become useful. and a material metaphor for the creator God as craftsman. In the ancient world, as Karl Harper has demonstrated, slavery prevented sexuality from being distinguished from sexual exploitation and the patriarchal domination of women. The ancient Christian solution was to encourage the renunciation of sex, but ultimately this option was only viable for a spiritual and often social elite. The only material purpose for sexuality in Christian eyes was procreation. We can see how this bifurcation of technology and sexuality led in later Western society to the stark contrast between nature and artifact. Now, today, we've entered the fourth industrial revolution, in which a new set of technologies are converging, certainly more powerful than those of the Roman Empire, but also in an era of socio-political instability brought on through globalization. One lesson to be learned from the ancient example is that when technologies converge, it is difficult to predict which one will have the most impact on sexual politics. We should not be so obsessed with how the internet hosts Pornhub or with how an AI robot like Sophia reinstates the patriarchal idea of the caring, subservient female. Just as in the case of concrete and the amphitheater, it may be graphene that unexpectedly reshapes sexuality in the transcendental social. To counter sexual exploitation and patriarchal domination, we need to be as intentional in our sexual politics as ancient Christians were. The failure of Christian sexual asceticism was not due to its rejection of embodiment. It failed because it never successfully had a program of re-embodiment, except for the very few. It was unable to think of sexuality outside of a binary of pleasure, exploitation, or reconnect the body to technology in ways that were non-exploitative. Can we do better?